My name is Amelia, and I'm 30 years old. On the exact day I celebrated this milestone birthday, I uncovered a secret that shattered my entire reality. My fiance was marrying my younger sister. But before I dive into the harrowing details of the lawsuit that ultimately tore my family apart, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from today. Please drop your city in the comments below. Thank you so much for being here, and I genuinely hope you're having an absolutely wonderful day. Knowing I'm not just speaking into an empty room, but connecting with real people who are listening, means more to me than I can express. My story truly begins on a Tuesday, the day of my 30th birthday. It was also the exact moment the life I had so carefully constructed came to a screeching, devastating halt. I remember sitting in the dead, suffocating silence of my apartment, feeling utterly microscopic and entirely alone on my sofa. The loudest sound in the entire room was the heavy, oppressive quiet itself. This night was supposed to be a joyous occasion, filled with the bright sounds of laughter, the melodic clinking of champagne glasses, and the comforting warmth of the people I loved most in the world. Instead, the only thing breaking the silence was the low, monotonous hum of the refrigerator. I lay there, mindlessly scrolling through my phone in a desperate attempt to numb the sharp, relentless ache blooming in my chest. Without warning, a notification popped up at the top of my screen. I had been tagged in a photo. Without even thinking, I tapped it, my brain barely registering what I was about to see. And there it was. It was an elegant, professionally shot photograph, bathed in soft, romantic lighting with white roses absolutely everywhere. Standing right in the center of the frame was my younger sister, Olivia, wearing a stunning, intricate white lace gown. She was a bride. For a fleeting fraction of a second, I just felt a confused, sharp sting of hurt. She was getting married, and she hadn't even breathed a word of it to me. Then, my eyes drifted over to the groom. The blood instantly drained from my face. The air rushed completely out of my lungs, leaving a hollow, burning void in my chest. He was standing right next to her, his hand resting gently, intimately on her waist, wearing that brilliant, familiar smile I knew far better than my own reflection. It was Ethan, my fiance. My hand went slick with sweat against the glass of my phone. I physically couldn't breathe. I zoomed in on the image, my thumb trembling so violently I could barely keep the screen steady. But there was no mistaking him. It was the same dark hair, the same strong jawline, the same piercing blue eyes that, just 1 week prior over a romantic dinner, had looked deeply into mine and promised me forever. The silence in my apartment wasn't just quiet anymore. It was deafening, roaring in my ears like a freight train. Just a few hours earlier, the picture had been entirely different. I had been standing in a sun-drenched, beautifully manicured garden in Napa Valley, surrounded by dozens of perfectly arranged empty chairs. I had spent 6 agonizing months meticulously planning my 30th birthday party. It was supposed to be a major, joyous celebration, a true milestone in my life. I had booked this stunning boutique venue with delicate fairy lights strung between ancient oak trees. 50 chairs, 50 elegant, curated table settings, a bespoke lavender lemon cake that cost a small fortune, and not a single soul had shown up to occupy any of them. The disappearance of my guests had started with my mother, Carol, calling me that very morning. Her voice had practically dripped with fake, manufactured sympathy. "Oh, sweetie, something terrible has happened," she had said, her tone dripping with artificial sorrow. "There's a sudden family emergency. Your father and I have to handle it immediately. We are so incredibly sorry to miss your big day." A family emergency. Even then, the words had sounded entirely rehearsed, completely hollow, and suspiciously convenient. My father, Richard, hadn't even bothered to pick up the phone to call me. He had just sent a brief, dismissive text message that read, "Can't make it. Talk later." And Olivia, my own sister, I had called her 3 separate times as the venue sat empty. Every single call had gone straight to a generic, automated voicemail. But the deepest, most agonizing blow of all had come from Ethan. He had called me from the airport the day before, sounding incredibly stressed. I could hear the faint, echoing sound of airport boarding announcements in the background. "Baby, I'm so incredibly sorry," he had said, his voice thick with what had sounded like genuine, agonizing regret. This massive client in Chicago moved our meeting up. It's absolutely critical for my promotion. I'll be back Friday morning, and I'll make it up to you, I swear on my life. I already got your gift, and it's going to blow you away. I had believed him. Of course I had. This was the man I was actively building a life with. We shared a joint savings account, the very one we'd been pouring money into since our college days, our little nest egg that had finally grown into a substantial down payment for our first house together. He was my future, my rock. His promotion was our promotion. So I had swallowed my disappointment, told him I completely understood, and told him to travel safely. I had stood in that beautiful, empty garden for an hour, making up flimsy excuses to the confused caterers, my cheeks burning with a fiery, isolating humiliation. Eventually, I had paid them in full, told them to donate the untouched food, and driven home in a complete, numb daze, that expensive lavender lemon cake sitting heavily untouched in the passenger seat beside me. Now, staring at the glowing wedding photo on my phone screen, every single piece of the puzzle fell into place with terrifying, cruel clarity. My mother's fake, rehearsed sympathy, my father's cold, dismissive text, Olivia's suspicious silence, the phantom Chicago client meeting, the sudden business trip, the fabricated family emergency. These weren't separate, unrelated excuses. It was a single, seamlessly coordinated plan of deception, and I was the only one kept completely in the dark. My hands began to shake violently, but it wasn't from sadness anymore. A cold, sharp, dangerous feeling was settling deep into the pit of my stomach. I looked at his smiling face in the photo, the face of the man who had kissed me so tenderly goodbye just 2 days prior, and hovered my thumb over his contact button. As my thumb hung suspended over his name, that little digital icon representing a man who, it turned out, never actually existed, my phone suddenly vibrated violently in my hand. It wasn't Ethan calling to confess. It was my mother. For a split second, a foolish, desperately hopeful part of my brain thought, she's calling to explain. There has to be some logical, innocent explanation for this nightmare. I answered the call, my voice barely a whisper. Hello. Amelia, sweetie. Oh, thank goodness you finally picked up. Her voice was pure community theater, thick with forced tears and frantic, performative concern. We've been worried absolutely sick about you. We just heard the shocking news about Olivia and Ethan. I stared blankly at the wall ahead of me, the phone suddenly feeling as heavy as a lead brick in my hand. You just heard, I repeated, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Yes, sweetie. This is all a horrible, terrible misunderstanding. She started sobbing loudly now, employing those dramatic, gasping sobs she always used to deploy whenever my dad got angry about her spiraling credit card bills. Listen to me carefully. Ethan told us, he told all of us, that you two had broken up months ago. He said it was entirely mutual, that you both simply wanted different things, but had managed to remain friends. We had absolutely no idea you still thought you were together. We were completely blindsided. A hot, suffocating wave of anger rushed up the back of my neck. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the lie, the calculated, precise cruelty of it, was almost unbearable. I could mentally picture the four of them sitting around a dinner table, nodding along in agreement as Ethan spun his elaborate story, carefully painting me as a delusional, clingy ex-girlfriend. We didn't break up, Mom, I said, the words feeling entirely foreign and surreal in my mouth. Oh, you poor, poor thing, she cooed, but her voice was laced with a toxic pity that felt like battery acid burning through my skin. He completely lied to you. He lied to us, too. Olivia is absolutely heartbroken that this might hurt you. She loves her new husband so deeply, but she was utterly terrified of how you'd react to the news. That's why they kept the wedding so incredibly small and quiet. Small and quiet. The photos I was currently staring at showed a lavish, opulent affair at one of the most exclusive, expensive venues in the entire state. Professional caterers, a 12-piece live band, hundreds of impeccably dressed guests. The cost of my empty, pathetic party in Napa didn't even scratch the surface of this small, quiet wedding. Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously low, quiet whisper. How exactly did they pay for that wedding? There was a brief, loaded silence on the other end of the line. Well, Ethan's career has been going so incredibly well lately. That new promotion he just got came with a massive signing bonus and a much higher salary. He takes such good, extravagant care of Olivia. He insisted on paying for everything himself to prove to your father that he could properly support her. A new, chilling realization, cold and sharp as broken glass, sliced right through my lingering shock. His career, our future, our money. While my mother kept rambling on endlessly about misunderstandings and how I desperately needed to be the bigger person for the sake of my sister's newfound happiness, my other hand was already moving on autopilot. I swiped out of the wedding photos and opened my banking application. My heart suddenly pounded violently against my ribs like a trapped bird. With trembling fingers, I entered the password to our joint savings account, the one we had optimistically named our future. The screen slowly loaded. My breath caught violently in my throat. I felt every drop of color drain from my face. The balance displayed at the very top of the screen read, a pitiful $47.13. Just last week, there had been over $80,000 in that account. $80,000. That was my hard-earned savings, scraped together from my own salary since I was 22 years old. An inheritance carefully left to me by my grandparents. Years of strict budgeting, sacrificing daily luxuries, and living below my means. My half of our shared future. Gone, all of it, liquidated and vanished. Amelia, are you listening, sweetie? Please don't shut us out, my mother pleaded in my ear, completely oblivious to the horror unfolding on my screen. I couldn't hear her voice anymore. I was just scrolling mechanically down the screen, staring at the long, damning list of transactions. Withdrawal 5,000. Withdrawal 10,000. One massive withdrawal after another. And then at the very bottom of the ledger, dated just 4 days ago, came the final, killing blow, a wire transfer of $50,000. The memo line attached to the transaction read, in stark black and white, venue deposit Olivia and Ethan. He hadn't just paid for his own wedding with his money. He had paid for it with mine, with my dreams, with my future. My mother's elaborate story about his sudden promotion and massive bonus wasn't just a lie to cover up the elopement. It was a carefully crafted cover story designed to hide outright, blatant theft. And they had all stood by, fully aware, and let him do it. They had celebrated his union with my sister using my stolen money. Your father and I want to help you through this terrible time, sweetie. My mother's voice chirped brightly in my ear, completely oblivious to the devastation she was causing. Once they get back from their romantic honeymoon in Italy, we can all sit down as a family and talk this through. Something deep inside my chest snapped with a sharp, audible crack. The overwhelming sadness, the paralyzing shock, the burning pain, it all instantly burned away, leaving behind something entirely cold, hard, and incredibly, terrifyingly clear. I hung up the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't scream. I just pressed the red end call button on my screen, cutting her off cold in the middle of her sentence. I stared at the banking app, at that tiny, pathetic number mocking me from the glow of the screen, representing the absolute ashes of my life. They hadn't just taken my fiancé and my family. They had taken my entire future, every single penny I had worked so hard to secure. For a very long time, I just sat there, frozen. The phone lay on the cushion next to me, feeling radioactive, toxic to the touch. The silence rushed back into the apartment, heavier and more oppressive this time. It felt exactly like being pinned to the bottom of the ocean. The pressure was immense, crushing. I couldn't move a muscle. I couldn't form a single coherent thought. Then a sharp gasp escaped my lips, followed immediately by another. The dam I had built inside my chest finally broke apart completely. I slid slowly off the sofa onto the floor, curling my body into a tight ball with my forehead pressed hard against the rough carpet. The kind of deep, wrenching crying that violently tears you apart from the inside out took complete control of my body. It was a visceral, physical ache, a hollow, gaping pain in my chest that genuinely felt like it was going to split me in two. Every single lie they'd ever told me, every time my mother had praised Olivia while simultaneously criticizing me, Every time my father had completely ignored my presence. Every single broken promise from Ethan. It all came crashing down on top of me at once, an avalanche of betrayal. Hours later, when the tears had finally dried up and left me feeling hollowed out, I dragged myself up from the floor and walked to the hallway closet. On the very top shelf, hidden behind a stack of old, forgotten towels, was a dusty shoebox. I reached up and pulled it down. Inside was the complete, documented story of my life with Ethan. Our first movie ticket stubs, a dried, brittle rose from our first anniversary, a silly, brightly colored photo strip from the county fair, and dozens of handwritten notes he had lovingly left on my pillow or tucked under my windshield wiper over the years. Can't wait to see you tonight. You are my everything, future Mrs. Thompson. I traced his familiar, looping handwriting with my fingertip. The ink that had once made my heart flutter now read like damning evidence of a massive, long-term scam. This wasn't just a standard breakup. This wasn't a man who simply fell out of love. This was a calculated conspiracy, a prolonged, methodical deception. My own family had held me down, keeping me distracted and compliant, while the man I trusted most in the world took absolutely everything from me, both emotionally and financially. I picked up the last photo in the box. It had been taken on New Year's Eve, just a few short months ago. We were standing on my apartment balcony, holding tall champagne glasses and smiling radiantly at the camera. I remembered his toast vividly. "To 2025, he had said, clinking his glass gently against mine. "The year we finally buy our house. The year our real life begins." Looking at his smiling, trustworthy face in the photo, and my own utterly naive, trusting expression, something fundamental shifted deep inside my bones. The tears abruptly stopped. The heavy, uncontrollable sobbing quieted, quickly replaced by a strange, freezing, unnatural calm. Looking at this man who had shared my bed, my life, and my dreams, I realized I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt angry. A pure, clean, incredibly focused anger that sharpened my mind like a freshly honed blade. Crying wasn't going to bring my stolen money back. Crying wouldn't erase the profound humiliation of talking to an empty garden. Crying was exactly what they expected me to do. They expected me to fall apart at the seams, to be the tragic, pathetic story they whispered about to their wealthy friends with performative pity over cocktails. They expected me to accept the role of the victim. I was absolutely not going to be the victim. I stood up, my legs slightly shaky, but suddenly filled with an iron sense of purpose. I walked over to my laptop and flipped it open, the bright screen illuminating my tear-stained face. For a brief second, my cursor hovered over the folder labeled Ethan and Me. My very first instinct was to hit delete, to permanently erase the last 5 years of my life from existence. But I didn't. Instead, I created a brand new folder on my desktop. I typed out a single, decisive word, evidence asterisk. My fingers flew rapidly across the keyboard. I went back to social media and screenshotted every single wedding photo I could find. The guests, the expensive venue, the towering cake, the happy, glowing couple. I saved them all systematically. I logged back into my bank account, downloaded the full official statements showing the complete $80,000 theft, and saved the PDFs directly into the folder. I went through years of old emails, specifically searching for and finding the ones where Ethan and I had explicitly discussed our savings plan, clearly stating in writing that the money was earmarked for our down payment. Evidence. I scanned every birthday card from my mother where she had affectionately referred to Ethan as the wonderful son she never had. More evidence. Every click of the mouse felt like a small, defiant act of rebellion. Every saved file was a heavy brick I was carefully placing around my shattered heart, building a wall of protection. I worked obsessively for an hour, my grief fully and completely replaced by a cold, methodical, razor-sharp focus. By the time I finally finished, I had a neat, highly organized folder containing the entire, undeniable story of their betrayal. Their entire conspiracy, documented, time-stamped, and utterly undeniable. They thought they had left me with absolutely nothing. They were dead wrong. They had given me a distinct, driving purpose. Looking at that folder, at that digital mountain of lies, I knew exactly what I had to do next. My hand was perfectly steady as I picked up my phone. I didn't search for a grief counselor. I didn't call a sympathetic friend to cry on their shoulder. I opened my web browser and typed 4 precise words into the search bar. Best fraud attorney. If you're still listening at this point, please take a second to like this video and drop the number 1 in the comments section below. It genuinely lets me know that you're actively supporting me and that you're committed to being on this journey with me. Your support is the fuel that keeps me going. Please, leave a 1 in the comments right now, and let's dive into the rest of the story together. The very next morning, I walked confidently into the downtown office of Arthur Davies. His prestigious law firm occupied the entire top floor of a gleaming glass skyscraper downtown, the exact kind of place that radiated immense wealth, quiet power, and unshakable confidence. Mr. Davies himself was in his early 60s, with incredibly sharp, observant eyes and a firm handshake that could probably crush stone. He didn't offer me empty sympathy or platitudes. He offered concrete strategy. I laid absolutely everything out on his polished mahogany desk. The damning bank statements, the printed emails, the high-resolution screenshots of the wedding. I told him the entire story from beginning to end, and I did it without my voice shaking even once. He listened with intense focus, occasionally making a precise note on a yellow legal pad with a silver pen. When I finally finished speaking, he leaned back slowly in his high-backed leather chair, crossing his fingers over his vest. "Ms. Miller," he said, his voice deep, calm, and even. "What your former fiancé did here is not just a matter of a broken heart or a messy breakup. This is grand larceny. And what your family actively did is aiding and abetting a financial conspiracy. They are fully complicit accomplices." Hearing my deep, agonizing pain translated into cold, hard, undeniable legal terms was quite possibly the most validating thing I had ever experienced in my entire life. I wasn't just an over-emotional woman overreacting to a breakup. This was an actual, prosecutable crime. "They think they're completely untouchable," I said firmly. "My father has a tremendous amount of influence and power in this city. They have significant money. They have deep, entrenched connections." Mr. Davies allowed a very small, knowing smile to touch the corners of his lips. People like that often blindly believe in the armor of their own reputation. They have a great deal to lose. Their status, their lucrative business deals, their pristine standing in the community. That is exactly what makes them highly vulnerable. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "We can immediately file a lawsuit for the full return of your stolen funds, plus punitive damages for the severe emotional distress they've caused. I won't lie to you, it's going to be a vicious battle. Are you truly ready for this?" I looked him dead in the eye without blinking. "I'm ready." Stepping out of his office and back into the bright sunlight, I felt a tiny, undeniable spark of personal power ignite for the very first time in my entire life. The next immediate steps were incredibly difficult, but entirely necessary. I went back to the beautiful apartment I had shared with Ethan, the place still heavily filled with his expensive clothes, his books, his lingering scent. I didn't shed a single tear. I just started packing. I was utterly methodical about it. I hired a professional moving company and had them put all my furniture, my books, and my entire life into a secure storage unit. I packed only 2 large suitcases of absolute essentials. Everything else, every lavish gift he had ever bought me, every framed photo, every shared memory of our life together, I left in a large, neat pile in the very center of the empty living room. I threw my set of keys onto the marble kitchen counter, walked out the front door, and never once looked back. My employer at the time was incredibly kind and understanding about the situation. I told my boss I was dealing with a severe, unresolvable family emergency and needed to officially resign. I had always earned a good salary and had been a top-performing employee, so they generously offered to let me take an extended sabbatical instead, holding my position open. But I politely declined. I couldn't physically stay in that city anymore. Every street corner held a painful memory, a lingering ghost of a life that had been built entirely on a foundation of lies. I needed a completely clean break, A total, uncompromising reset. 2 weeks later, I was on a one-way flight to Austin, Texas. I had never even visited there before. That was entirely the point. It was a fresh place with no history, no painful ghosts, just a blank slate and a future I had to build entirely from scratch. The first few months, they were an absolute blur of cheap, sparsely furnished apartments, endless instant noodles, and grueling back-to-back job interviews. It was intensely lonely. It was brutally hard. Some nights, I'd sit alone in my tiny, echoing living room, and the full, crushing weight of everything I'd lost would hit me so hard I'd just sit there staring at the blank wall for hours. But I stubbornly refused to let myself fall back into that dark, paralyzing hole of despair. Every single time the sadness crept in, threatening to pull me under, I'd open my laptop and stare at that evidence folder glowing on my desktop. It immediately reminded me of my true purpose. I eventually landed a fantastic marketing job at a rapidly growing tech startup. The work was incredibly demanding, requiring long, grueling hours, but I willingly poured every single ounce of my fractured energy into it. I stayed completely and ruthlessly focused on my career. While my old college friends were getting married and starting to have bobbies, I was aggressively closing massive deals and completely rewriting the company's marketing strategy from the ground up. I got a major promotion within my first 6 months. All the while, I kept working closely with Mr. Davies back in California. We communicated strictly via heavily encrypted emails, and I sent him every new piece of information I could dig up. He was slowly but surely building the case, block by solid block. Of course, my family desperately tried to reach me. My mother left dozens of frantic voicemails, her tone wildly swinging between weak, manipulated concern and angry, demanding orders that I stop this childish behavior immediately. My father sent a few brief, incredibly cold emails, explicitly threatening to write me out of his will entirely, an entirely empty threat, since I already knew there was no actual inheritance coming to me anyway. I never replied to any of them. My absolute silence was a solid steel wall they couldn't scale or breach. Then, about 8 months after my sudden move to Austin, a heavily encrypted email from Mr. Davies suddenly landed in my inbox. My heart leaped into my throat. The subject line was frustratingly short, a hurdle. I clicked it open rapidly, my eyes scanning the text with mounting anxiety. "Amelia," it read, "their legal team has officially responded to our initial demand letter. They are aggressively filing a motion to dismiss the case entirely. They are claiming that the $80,000 was a voluntary gift you gave to Ethan to help him start his new life post-breakup. They claim the breakup was entirely mutual, and that this lawsuit is simply a retaliatory, vindictive move by a jealous, unstable ex-girlfriend. We desperately need more than just bank statements to prove otherwise. We need undeniable proof of intent to defraud. We need something that explicitly links that money to a shared future that they all knew about. Right now, unfortunately, it's just your word against the 4 of them." I leaned back heavily in my desk chair, the air completely leaving my lungs. A gift. They were actually trying to twist my entire life savings into a generous, parting gift. My word against the 4 of them, who had undoubtedly rehearsed their stories to perfection. I felt a familiar, creeping, cold dread settling back into my chest. For the first time since I had left, I genuinely wondered if they were actually going to get away with this. My attorney's email felt exactly like a physical blow to the stomach. A gift. The word itself was an absolute insult to the 5 years of my life I had invested. For a whole, miserable week, I lived in a state of low-grade, constant panic that I hadn't felt since that very first night on my apartment floor. They were going to spin this narrative. They were going to paint me in public as a bitter, unstable, jealous ex-girlfriend. And with my father's stellar reputation in that town, people would absolutely believe them. How could I possibly prove what was going on inside Ethan's head? How could I prove that they all knew the truth? On a dreary Saturday morning, as I sat at my tiny kitchen table staring blindly at a pile of legal documents in utter despair, my doorbell suddenly rang. It was a courier delivery, a small, surprisingly heavy cardboard package. The return address was completely unfamiliar to me, originating from a small, rural town in Vermont. Confused, I signed for the package and took it inside. Opening the cardboard box, I found an old, beautifully faded velvet jewelry box and a folded letter resting on top. I opened the letter first. The handwriting was elegant but slightly shaky with age. It was from my great-aunt Margaret, my grandmother's older sister. I hadn't seen or spoken to her since I was a small child. Dearest Amelia, asterisk the letter began. I have heard of your terrible troubles through the family grapevine. I cannot say I am entirely surprised, but I am deeply, profoundly sorry. Your mother has always been well. She is exactly who she is. Before your dear grandmother passed away, she gave this box to me for safekeeping. She made me promise to keep it hidden until the right moment arrived. She said your mother would inevitably try to take it, but that it was never meant for her. It was always meant for her strongest granddaughter. My hands shook violently as I reached the final line. I slowly reached over and opened the velvet box. Lying perfectly on a bed of faded, crushed silk was my grandmother's necklace. A delicate, intricately woven platinum chain set with a brilliant, dazzling diamond that caught the morning sunlight streaming through the window, throwing tiny, dancing rainbows across my kitchen walls. I had seen it in old, black and white photographs. My mother had always told me growing up that it had been lost in a chaotic move years ago, claiming she was completely heartbroken over its loss. Another calculated lie in a lifetime of lies. My grandmother had seen me. She had seen exactly who I really was in a way my own mother never had and never would. She knew I was strong. Holding that necklace, feeling its cool, substantial weight resting in my palm, was like a massive electric shock directly to my soul. It wasn't just a piece of expensive jewelry. It was ultimate validation. It was a tangible piece of my true heritage, a physical symbol of the strength and resilience passed down through the women of my bloodline. It reminded me exactly of who I was. I wasn't a victim. I was my grandmother's granddaughter. The necklace didn't magically solve my complex legal problem, but it reignited a dying fire deep inside my chest. That very afternoon, absolutely determined to find a breakthrough, any kind of breakthrough, I started digging frantically online, not for boring legal documents, but for social proof. I began meticulously researching the elite social circles my family moved in. And that's exactly when I found it. It was a detailed article on a local society blog, a glowing, flattering piece about my father, Richard Miller, and his tireless philanthropic work for local charities. The absolute center of the article was their biggest social event of the year, the Miller family annual charity gala for the Children's Hospital. It was their crown jewel, the single event that firmly established them as untouchable pillars of the community. The article quoted my father extensively, him talking at length about personal integrity, strong family values, and the vital importance of maintaining a good, unblemished name. Then I saw the date. The gala was scheduled to take place in just 6 weeks. A sharp, absolutely brilliant idea suddenly lit up my brain like a lightning strike. I had been trying to fight them in a sterile courtroom, a private, quiet battle of expensive lawyers and boring motions. But that wasn't where their true power lay. Their power lay entirely in their pristine public image. Their reputation was absolutely everything to them. It was their ultimate, vulnerable Achilles heel. I thought about the exclusive guest list. The mayor, city council members, wealthy business leaders, all their rich friends and lucrative clients. Everyone my father desperately needed to impress. Everyone my mother loved to preen and show off in front of. What would happen if their perfectly curated, flawless world came crashing down right in front of that elite audience? What would happen if the mask they wore so carefully was violently ripped off in the exact one place they felt the absolute safest? I picked up my phone and rapidly dialed my lawyer. Mr. Davies answered on the second ring. Mr. Davies, I said, with a newly discovered, burning sense of purpose, my voice steady and razor-sharp. Forget about responding to the motion to dismiss. Stop everything else you are doing. I know exactly how we are going to handle this case, and we are going to bring it all out into the open. The 6 weeks leading up to the charity gala were, without a doubt, the most intensely focused and nerve-wracking days of my entire life. My plan was undeniably bold, bordering on audacious, and after a few prolonged moments of stunned, absolute silence on the other end of the phone line, Mr. Davies embraced it with complete and total enthusiasm. He called it a brilliant public strategy designed for maximum, devastating impact. First and foremost, I had to secure a legitimate spot at the exclusive event. My father's prestigious firm was a major financial sponsor, and their VIP tables were reserved strictly for high-end clients, city officials, and deeply entrenched socialites. There was no scenario where I could simply buy a ticket as Richard Miller's estranged daughter. But the tech startup I worked for in Austin was growing at an explosive, rapid rate. I went directly to my CEO with a compelling, carefully crafted proposal. I suggested that our company sponsor a table at the gala, framing it entirely as a strategic business move to establish our brand presence in a lucrative new market. I highlighted the unparalleled networking opportunities and the extensive media coverage the event consistently attracted, keeping my deeply personal connection to the Miller family completely out of the conversation. I kept it strictly, undeniably professional, and to my immense relief, he approved it on the spot. My company cut the sponsorship check, bought a premier table, and just like that, I had my official, undeniable ticket inside the fortress. Next came the critical legal preparations. Mr. Davies meticulously drafted formal, legally binding summonses, not just for Ethan, but for Olivia, my mother, and my father. 4 separate, highly detailed sets of legal documents outlining each person's specific, documented role in the elaborate financial deception. He hired a seasoned local process server, a discreet, highly professional man who deeply understood the critical, razor-thin importance of timing. The plan we devised was precise down to the very second. The server would confidently enter the grand ballroom at exactly 8:45 p.m. That was the absolute peak of the evening's energy, right when my father would be standing at the podium delivering his highly anticipated keynote speech to the entranced room. As the days rapidly drew closer to the event, a strange, almost unsettling sense of calm gradually washed over me. The burning anger and the deep sadness were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but they had been forged in the fire of the previous months into something entirely different, a sharp, highly effective tool. I flew back to California 2 days before the gala, telling absolutely no one in my family that I was returning to the state. I completely skipped the cheap, depressing motels I had stayed in during my previous life, and used the first major commission check from my new job in Austin to book a luxurious, sprawling suite at the historic world-renowned Fairmont Hotel, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city below. The frightened, broken girl who had desperately fled this place nearly a year ago was entirely gone. In her place stood a woman with a meticulous, ironclad plan. That night, I ordered an expensive room service dinner and sat by the massive window overlooking the sprawling city lights, reviewing the intricate details of the plan one final time. Suddenly, I felt a sharp, unwelcome shiver of apprehension crawl up my spine, a flicker of nagging doubt. What if something went disastrously wrong? What if they somehow found a way to anticipate this and turn it against me in court? Then, I reached over and opened the faded velvet box, taking out my grandmother's necklace. The brilliant diamond seemed to glow and pulse with its own inner light in the dim hotel room. I carefully fastened it around my neck. The cool, heavy metal resting against my bare skin was an immediate, powerful grounding force. It was a silent reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight, that I carried the indomitable strength of the fierce woman who had come before me. The fear immediately began to fade, rapidly replaced by a cold, unwavering, absolute resolve. The night of the gala finally arrived. I took my time getting ready, savoring every deliberate moment. I wore a stunning dress I had purchased specifically for this occasion. It wasn't black, the traditional color of mourning, nor was it red, the color of obvious, volatile anger. It was a deep, rich emerald green, a color universally representing new beginnings, fierce success, and boundless vitality. It was elegant, sophisticated, and undeniably powerful. When my hair was perfectly styled, and the heavy diamond necklace sat flawlessly against my collarbone, I stood before the full-length mirror and looked at my reflection. I barely recognized the confident, formidable woman looking back at me. There were absolutely no tears in her eyes, only a fierce, burning determination that radiated from her very core. The drive to the venue felt entirely surreal, like moving through a waking dream. The black limousine passed the intimate restaurant where Ethan and I had celebrated our very first anniversary, and the picturesque park where he had dropped to one knee and proposed. They were nothing more than geographical locations now, mere backdrops to someone else's life, completely stripped of their emotional weight. The limousine pulled up smoothly to the grand, sweeping entrance of the luxury ballroom. The uniformed valet opened the heavy door, and the sheer wall of lights was immediately blinding. The rich, swelling sound of a live orchestra and the loud, animated chatter of hundreds of wealthy people spilled out onto the red-carpeted steps. I could see the rapid-fire camera flashes from the local press corps stationed just inside the doors. This was exactly what my family lived for. A grand, lavish production designed to display their own self-importance to the world. I took a deep, centering breath, feeling my grandmother's cool diamond resting against my skin like a silent, invisible shield, and walked confidently inside. Stepping into that opulent ballroom felt exactly like willingly entering a predator's den. The air was thick with the mingled scent of expensive, imported perfumes, and the low, self-satisfied murmur of wealthy people congratulating each other on their own success. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted, frescoed ceiling, and an army of servers in crisp black tuxedos carried silver trays of chilled champagne seamlessly through the densely packed crowd. It was a flawless, meticulously maintained illusion of high-class sophistication and charitable goodwill. As I walked further into the room, heads began to turn. I watched the visible ripple of shocked recognition pass rapidly through the crowd like a wave, as hushed whispers traveled from one tight-knit circle to the next, people urgently asking one another if that was really Richard's daughter, Amelia Miller, the one who had mysteriously moved away months ago. I ignored every single pair of eyes fixed on me, my own eyes methodically scanning the vast room, searching. Then I found them. They occupied a prime, central spot near the main stage, projecting the absolute perfect, flawless image of a unified, happy family. My father, Richard, looked commanding and authoritative in his tailored black tuxedo, warmly shaking hands with the city's mayor. My mother, Carol, was absolutely radiant in a shimmering silver gown, letting out her signature, well-practiced, melodic laugh at something the mayor's wife had said. Standing right beside her, holding hands and projecting pure marital bliss, were Olivia and Ethan. Olivia looked thoroughly triumphant in a fitted, glittering gold dress, while Ethan looked noticeably tired and drawn, holding a crystal tumbler of whiskey with a tight smile that didn't even come close to reaching his eyes. Across the crowded, noisy room, our eyes met. My mother's practiced smile froze instantly on her face, her champagne glass hovering completely still in midair as pure, unfiltered panic flashed dangerously in her wide eyes. My father quickly followed the direction of her terrified gaze, his expression rapidly hardening into a dark mask of cold, controlled anger. Olivia simply stared at me in open-mouthed shock, her lower lip trembling slightly. And Ethan looked as if he had just seen a ghost materialize in front of him, physically taking a sharp, stumbling step backward and reflexively pulling Olivia closer to him with a protective grip. I didn't approach them. I didn't need to. I offered them a slow, deliberate, slight smile, one completely devoid of any warmth, any history, or any forgiveness. It was a smile that clearly said, I know absolutely everything, and I am here. Then I smoothly turned away, walked calmly to my company's sponsored table, and sat down. For the next agonizing hour, I could physically feel their terrified eyes burning into my back from across the room. Dinner was a complete blur of polite, surface-level conversation with my table mates. I ate my overpriced food, sipped my wine, and waited with the patience of a seasoned predator. At exactly 8:30 p.m., the grand ballroom lights smoothly dimmed. The master of ceremonies, a well-known local radio personality, took the polished wooden podium, launching into a long, glowing, effusive introduction for the man of the evening, a celebrated philanthropist, a visionary business leader, and most importantly, a dedicated, loving family man, my father, Richard Miller. He walked confidently onto the stage to a chorus of thunderous, enthusiastic applause, standing tall at the podium and visibly basking in the warm glow of the crowd's immense admiration. He cleared his throat and began his highly anticipated speech. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight." His deep, commanding voice boomed through the state-of-the-art speakers. "When we talk about community, we are really, at its core, talking about family. We are talking about unwavering integrity. We are talking about the fundamental values we pass down to our children, the lasting legacy we build together for the future." I checked the time glowing on my phone screen. It was 8:44 p.m. Right as my father's speech reached its emotional, soaring peak, I saw him. An ordinary-looking, completely unremarkable man in a well-tailored gray suit quietly entered the ballroom through a discreet side door. He was utterly forgettable in appearance, moving with a quiet, professional purpose as his sharp eyes quickly scanned the densely packed room. It was the process server. He walked straight and unhurried toward the main stage. A few sharp-eyed people in the crowd noticed his deliberate approach, and a confused murmur slowly began to ripple through the front tables. Completely blinded by the harsh, hot stage lights, my father didn't see the man approaching at first. The man calmly walked up the short, carpeted steps and stood directly in front of the podium. My father stopped abruptly mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing with sharp confusion that quickly morphed into blazing anger. "Excuse me," my father muttered sharply into the live microphone, his voice echoing loudly through the silent room. "This is a private, closed event." The man in the gray suit didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't hesitate. He simply held out a thick, heavy manila envelope stamped with the official seal of the court. "Richard Miller," he said, his voice calm but firm, carrying clearly to the shocked front rows even without the aid of a microphone. "You have been served." A collective, sharp gasp echoed violently through the grand ballroom. The man calmly placed the thick envelope right on the polished podium, directly in front of my stunned, frozen father. Then he turned on his heel, walked efficiently down the steps, and headed straight for my mother's VIP table, handing her the second thick envelope. Her face instantly turned a ghastly, sickly white, her hand flying to her chest. Next, he walked deliberately over to Olivia and Ethan's table. He placed a third envelope directly in front of Olivia, who immediately dissolved into loud, hysterical tears, her hands flying to her face. Finally, he set the last, damning envelope directly in front of Ethan, who stared down at it as if it were a live explosive device sitting on the white tablecloth. "Ethan Thompson," the server stated clearly, "you have been served." Absolute, explosive chaos erupted in the grand ballroom. Hushed whispers instantly turned into loud, animated chatter. Dozens of phone cameras were frantically raised in the air, and bright flashes went off across the room like a chaotic lightning storm. My father stood frozen on the stage, his meticulously prepared speech completely forgotten. My mother looked as though she were ready to collapse and faint on the spot, and my sister sobbed uncontrollably into her expensive napkin. I didn't say a single word, and I didn't need to. I took one final, long look at the absolute ruin of their perfectly curated evening, watching their pristine, untouchable reputation dissolve right before their very eyes in front of everyone they cared about. Then I stood up, smoothly smoothed down the fabric of my emerald dress, and walked out of the grand ballroom, leaving the deafening sound of their public collapse far behind me. The fallout was remarkably swift and absolutely massive. The very next morning, the exact same local society blog that had previously heaped glowing praise on my father ran a shocking new headline detailing the absolute chaos at the charity gala and the explosive allegations of massive financial fraud. The story spread like absolute wildfire across the city and beyond. My lawyer had strategically provided an anonymous, detailed tip to a well-connected journalist, who then broke the story wide open with every single verified, documented detail. The devastating birthday betrayal, the completely drained joint savings account, and the coordinated, long-term family deception. The carefully crafted narrative of my father's unimpeachable integrity was completely and permanently replaced by the ugly, undeniable reality of family greed and conspiracy. They had absolutely no defense left. Faced with the terrifying prospect of a highly public jury trial and a brutal, invasive discovery process that would expose every single one of their financial and personal secrets to the world, they folded completely. Exactly 1 week later, Mr. Davies called me with a final settlement offer. They agreed to return every single penny of the stolen $80,000, plus an additional $100,000 in punitive damages for the emotional distress they had caused. They were also legally forced to sign a formal notarized statement explicitly acknowledging that the funds were never a gift, effectively admitting in writing to their calculated deception. There was no lengthy, drawn-out legal battle, just a quiet, deeply humiliating, and absolute defeat for them. The money arrived in my account 3 days later, but it was never truly about the money. It was always about the truth. Their business took a massive, devastating hit as high-profile clients who valued discretion and reputation above all else quickly pulled their accounts and distanced themselves. Former friends who used to eagerly flock to their lavish parties now actively crossed the street to avoid them. They had built their entire glittering world on a false, manufactured image, and a single, perfectly timed legal action had brought the entire fragile structure crashing to the ground. I stayed in Austin, and my life kept moving steadily and beautifully forward. I earned another well-deserved promotion at the tech startup, eventually becoming the head of my entire department. I bought a charming, small house with a sprawling, sunlit backyard in a quiet, friendly neighborhood. I made genuine, loyal friends, the kind of people who show up at your door with hot soup when you're sick, and who celebrate your successes with pure, unadulterated joy and not a single hint of jealousy. I built a real, loving family, entirely of my own choosing. Exactly 1 year after the gala, on my 31st birthday, I hosted a joyful party in my backyard. It wasn't a lavish, over-the-top affair, just a dozen close friends, a sizzling grill full of food, and warm string lights twinkling softly in the balmy Texas twilight. There was so much pure, unforced laughter. Before my friends arrived, I stood in my bedroom getting ready. I opened the old, familiar velvet box, and my grandmother's necklace sparkled brilliantly against the faded silk. I carefully fastened it around my neck. It didn't feel like heavy armor anymore. It just felt like it belonged exactly where it was. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, I saw a genuinely happy woman radiating true, deep peace of mind. The scars from the betrayal remained as faint reminders of a hard-fought battle won, but they didn't hurt anymore. They were simply physical proof of how incredibly strong I had become. My family had tried to lock me out, leaving me with absolutely nothing but the deafening silence of their betrayal. But they didn't realize something fundamental. When you lock someone out of a toxic, destructive environment, you aren't punishing them. You are setting them free. They cast me out into the cold, but in doing so, they unknowingly gave me the greatest gift of all. I finally found my true home, and I found myself. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story. Speaking out about this wasn't easy, but sharing it with all of you feels like the absolute final step in completely closing that dark chapter of my life for good. If you've ever been deeply let down or betrayed by the very people who were supposed to care for you and protect you the most, what was the defining moment that made you realize you had to stand up and fight for yourself? I would love to hear your experiences, so please let me know in the comments below. If my story resonated with you on any level, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories of strength and resilience. You are not alone. Never forget that.